Thank you. Good morning. I'd like to call the meeting to order and acknowledge that we are in Treaty 1 territory, the home and traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Innu, and Dakota peoples, and in the national homeland of the Red River Métis. Our drinking water comes from Shoal Lake 40 First Nation in Treaty 3 territory. Our panel today will consist of me, Ron Barrett joining us on Zoom, and Richard Whitbread joining us on Zoom as well. The Assessment Department personnel today is Mr. Jason Brown, and the administrative personnel is Ms. Fran Picoto. To the Zoom participants of the hearing, please note that you are placed in the waiting room until your property is called upon. When it is your turn, you will be admitted into the meeting. Kindly follow along on the City of Winnipeg's Board of Revision YouTube channel for the hearing process. Once the host admits you into the hearing, please close or mute your YouTube player. You will then be permitted to speak with respect to your property. Once your hearing is concluded, you may leave the meeting. We will be hearing applications for revision of the assessment rule in accordance with the Municipal Assessment Act. The matters for which revision is requested have been described in each application, and we will limit discussion to those matters. The statements that are made at this hearing are sworn testimony, and anyone speaking to the matters must be sworn in. Please be advised that comparisons of assessments of properties are not considered evidence of market value by the Board of Revision. The Board of Revision is appointed annually by Council and is independent of it and the City Administration. It makes its decisions on the basis of the evidence provided at this hearing and issues a written order that will be mailed to all parties as soon as possible. Please note that the Board's decisions with respect to an application may be appealed to the Manitoba Municipal Board if the matter pertains to assessed value or classification, or to the Court of King's Bench if the matter pertains to the applications of exemptions from taxation. Should you wish to appeal, information on how to do so will be included in the Board's order. With respect to the hearing process, I will confirm the points of appeal with your property to be addressed with each applicant following the swearing in. We will then have the assessor's testimony followed by questions that the applicant may have, and then the applicant's testimony followed by questions. Each side will have an opportunity to summarize if they wish. Once all of the evidence about an application has been brought forward, the applicant may leave. The process will repeat for each item on the docket today. The session will close after all of the applications have been heard, and the Board will deliberate in private and make its decision. You will receive the Board's decision by registered mail as soon as possible. As information, all public hearings are live streamed, recorded, and will be part of the public record. We will be hearing items 1 through 6 inclusive on our docket today. Ms. Picoto, will you please affirm the assessors and the applicant's testimony?
Mr. Assessor, please state your full name.
Jason Brown.
Do you affirm that the evidence you're about to give at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. Mr. Applicant, please state your full name.
Jared Story.
Do you affirm that the evidence you're about to give at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We will then turn to number 1 on the list today, that being at an address or no address on Mountain Avenue. Mr. Brown, would you please introduce the property and provide us the evidence of your brief?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is file 24-2538. Roll number is 14041568000. This is a parking lot located on Mountain Avenue across from the Winnipeg Free Press building. It's used as auxiliary parking for the property, the main holding at 1355 Mountain. We have a 2025 assessed value of $990,000 that we're defending today. After reviewing the appellant's evidence, it appears they're seeking confirmation on this. So we'll just move to questions on this. Move to questions. I'm open for questioning. Thank you.
Okay, that's fine. Mr. Story, what else?
Yes, indeed. Just very quickly. So, Mr. Brown, you mentioned that this is indeed auxiliary parking for the main holding, Free Press, correct?
Correct.
And it's under common ownership?
Correct.
Okay. May I ask why the city has not merged the two roles?
I'm unaware of that.
Okay. Okay, I think I'll leave my comments, Mr. Chair, for my brief presentation, but we are requesting confirmation based on our decision that this value ought to be deducted from the main holding. So I'll leave that there, and thank you.
Thank you. We'll deal with the question of whether this should be deducted or whether it should be with respect to the main holding, when we deal with the main holding.
Absolutely. Yep.
So we're not gonna make confirmation contingent on something
Absolutely.
later. Fair enough. Okay, good. Mr. Barrett, questions?
I have none, Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Mr. Whitbread?
I have none, thank you.
I have one with respect to the depreciated cost of the detached structures. What is that detached structure and what is the nature of that? I'm just looking at page 6 of your brief.
Yeah.
Cost evaluation summary.
Yeah, good question. So beneath that heading is a description of what was assessed and depreciated. So the asphalt paving, the metal fence, the electrical wiring for the lights, and the actual lights themselves. And you can kind of see a picture on page 5 of the fence and the lighting and some of the other detached structures.
Okay, thank you. Is that depreciated on a straight line or is that, how is that depreciation calculated?
That is a good question. I'm not entirely sure.
Okay, fine. Thank you. I don't have anything further. Mr. Story.
So we are once again simply requesting confirmation based on our position that it ought to be removed from the main holding. I'll leave my comments for the presentation of main holding, but for the purpose of our exercise, Mr. Chair, I'm going to ask that this be confirmed today.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Brown. Do you have any questions with respect to that submission?
I do not. Thank you.
Mr. Whitbread?
Nothing.
Mr. Merritt?
I have none, Mr. Chairman, thank you.
And I have no questions. Assuming that there's no summary required given the positions,
That's correct.
Okay, so thank you, sir.
then we will conclude that matter and move on to number 2 on the docket. And I think it's safe to say this is the main structure that has been referred to. Mr. Brown, can you please introduce the property and present your evidence?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is file 24-2540. Roll number is 1404164500. We have a civic address at 1355 Mountain Avenue. This is between Bentall and Fife Streets. This is the Winnipeg Free Press building. We have a 2025 assessed value of $21,818,000 today. This is classified as an industrial heavy manufacturing property, built in 1990, with wall heights ranging from 14 to 28. It is zoned M2 manufacturing. We have a land area of 398,709 square feet and a gross floor area of 290,890 square feet. We have a land to plan ratio of 2.34. Page 3 shows the map view of the property located in Inkster Industrial Park. Aerial photograph on page 5. This is obviously a larger building coming in at just under 300,000 square feet. There are some interior photographs starting on page 10 and 11. Obviously not your typical manufacturing building. There are some common areas and some public areas, nice foyer, and then there's some office space as well. Interior pictures on page 12 and 13 as well. Moving to page 14, this is where our income workup begins. So this has been divided into 2 separate income streams. The first income stream on page 14 is the manufacturing component of the property. This is coming in at 184,000 square feet. We've used an average rent of $6.58 a square foot. We've reduced that by 3.5% vacancy, 3% expenses, and a shortfall of $4 per square foot. This results in a net operating income of $1,107,912. And we've capitalized that at 6.2%, which yields a value for this component of the assessment at $17,870,000. Moving to page 15. This is the office component of the property. We have a leasable area of 87,450 square feet. We've used an average rent of $6.37 per square foot. We reduced that by 20% vacancy, 3% expenses, and a shortfall of $8 per square foot. This results in a net operating income of $292,000 and 124. We've capitalized that at 7.4%, which yields a value of $3,948,000. I have some rent comparables starting on page 16. So just to note, the first three properties are office properties, and those are to justify our office rent. So you can see a range from $18.60 down to $8.60. The following properties are all industrial properties, rent comparables. Here we can see a range from $6.10 up to $9.55. I'll note that it's been brought to my attention that the comparable at 10 Hutchings Street was between related parties. So we will strike that from the list of comparables. We can see the range for the industrial comparables range from 228,484 square feet down to 23,190. We have wall heights ranging from 12 all the way up to 38 feet. And the effective year built ranges from 1964 up until 2020. Moving on to page 18, this shows the income value summary, just combining the two income streams for the office and the manufacturing, which yields the assessed value of $21,818,000. Moving to page 19, we have our capitalization rates. So for the office segment, the city is using a range from 5.9% up to 7%, with outside sources confirming that range. For industrial, we're using 5.35 up to 7.3. So I believe both of these cap rates fall within the middle of those ranges. And once again, we have the outside sources confirming our range. There is an income and expense statement starting on page 21. This is partially owner occupied, but they do rent some office space, which you can see on page 23. And those are all gross leases. With that, we ask that the assessment be confirmed at $21,818,000, and I'm open for questioning. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Mr. Story, questions?
Yes, thank you, sir. Mr. Brown, can we agree that this building would primarily be considered an industrial asset? Is that a fair comment?
Yeah, the majority of it is industrial. There is an office component to it.
Right.
That's probably larger than most industrial buildings.
Right.
And it's clearly not needed by the current owners.
Okay, so yeah. That's sort of my next question. So is it a fair, just for the board's knowledge, when we look at these industrial properties, typically, would you agree with me that the amount of office would typically fall somewhere between 10 and 15%?
Yeah, that would be accurate.
Okay, and this one is 32% office. So I think can we agree that it's, let's say, over officed based on what we typically see in our market?
It's a unique building in terms of industrial properties. Clearly, the level of finishing is a little higher than most industrial properties. They do have like front-facing public area, the foyer. But yeah, no, it is a unique industrial property.
Okay. Okay, and this assessment, is it indeed all derived from the model?
That's correct.
So there's been no overrides. It's simply straight from the model, and that's what we're dealing with today. You're defending the model?
I can't confirm 100% that there's no overrides, but they are model-driven values.
Okay,
We have different settings, but I don't have that offhand.
sure. And have you visited this property?
I have not. I've driven past it.
Okay. In terms of the parcel, can we agree that it is indeed an irregular parcel in terms of its shape?
That's correct.
Okay, and can we also agree that it's negatively impacted by a rail line, and that's why we have the property boundary following the curvature of that historic rail line? Is that a fair comment?
I believe that's a bit subjective. Some properties do benefit from having a rail line behind. I can't speculate as to whether or not it's a benefit or a disadvantage in this property.
Okay, but there is indeed a rail line for that property, and just as a general comment, that may, or would you agree with me that that may impede further development to this site? You can't dispose of that rail line, clearly.
What was the land to building ratio? 2.34. I believe, there's little room for further development on this parcel.
And can we agree, just as a general concept, that most of the industrial properties in the Inkster Industrial Park, we would expect to see somewhere between 3-to-1 and 4-to-1 land to building? Is that a fair comment?
I believe most property owners would find that would be optimal. We see some with vastly lower, some with much higher, depending on the usage of the property.
Okay, so based on these couple of issues that we've determined here early on, does the model have the capacity on a granular level to look at those factors and apply a cap rate with those considerations taken into account?
The model looks at sales of comparable buildings. They look at rents of comparable buildings, and then there's some user input as well. So it's tough to say. We do have settings within the model for investment rank and quality. So it's possible it's been captured, but I can't say offhand.
Okay, so I'm just now, Mr. Chairman, on page 14 of the assessor's evidence. Thank you. So I noticed here that we have a number of 4 different premises, but can we agree that the property in its current physical iteration, at least on the manufacturing side, the large propensity of industrial, that is indeed occupied and used by a single tenant, correct?
Correct.
Okay, and when I look at each one of these premises, is that sort of a hypothetical, or those would not be independently leasable, correct?
Correct.
Okay, and so the model does appear, when I see that the outputted rent per foot, the model does appear to be capturing economies of scale. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's possible.
Okay, and if indeed we looked at it, or the model looked at this property as single tenant with 184,000 square feet, would that overall rent not then be lower based on economies of scale?
Conceivably, it could. I'll note that the average of 6.58 is closer to the larger areas at 56,000 and 99,000.
Okay. And then the last one at retail warehouse, that should be storage, shouldn't it? That last premise that you have, it's not a retail warehouse, correct? 56.
Yeah, I'm unsure about how that would affect the value, but that's possible.
Okay. Okay. I think I've mentioned a number of our issues here. I think I'll move on to the, and sorry, just one last one on the cap rate for the industrial. I think I heard you say you're using the chart that's been included in all of the briefs this cycle, but do you have any sales for us to consider to determine how the model is outputting the cap rates for industrial this cycle?
Not for the purposes of this hearing.
Okay. Okay. Okay, so that is my questions on the industrial. So we'll just move quickly to the office section. We're just a little ways away on the cap rate. Same question. Do you have any office sales to determine how we're applying this cap rate to the office portion?
No, I do not.
Okay. Okay. Now, I just want to go through these rent comps very quickly, and I appreciate, Mr. Brown, that it's very difficult to find rent comps this size. I had trouble too. So I'm fine with your office rents. We've agreed to those. But looking at the industrial properties, okay, so Hutchings, we've discarded. The one on Regent, that's the Amazon warehouse, is it not?
That's correct.
Okay, and that's a very, very short lease at only 1 year?
Yes.
Okay, so would you give that considerable weight, or would that be considered something of an outlier?
Yeah, I think it shows the range of possibilities, but it is obviously among the higher rents for this size building in the.
Okay, and any sense of whether that owner had to do substantial work in order to secure a tenant like Amazon? That would be a very strong covenant. Do you know if any of that that rental rate that seems high, would any of that include, to your knowledge, construction costs or any capital costs that may be built into that to attaining that client?
I know there was considerable work done on the property, but I'm unsure of.
Right. Yeah, no, I agree with that. So, and then the ones that are after your office inputs, so running from King Edward to Oak Point, those are all much smaller than the 184,000 feet that we're looking at here, correct?
That's correct.
And likely would require some adjustment to capture the size of the subject. Is that fair?
Yeah, without demising walls.
Yeah. I agree with you on Sony Place. I'll get to that in 1 second. I agree with it as an input, but I have some questions. The one on Haggard, have you visited that property at all?
I have not. It is a newer property.
Right, and that's also. Are you aware that that's a very short government lease, and it's pandemic? It's the place where the government stored all of the PP&E and that sort of thing for the pandemic. Are you aware of that?
I'm not, but take your word for it. Thanks.
No problem. And just to be fair though, that is a pretty new building that would be considered in that sort of best in class area. Is that fair?
That would be industrial, yes.
Yeah. Okay. And then Sony Place. I think I've used that one as well. But can we agree that now it is an older lease, and I'm cognizant of that, but can we agree that that is a far superior building in a superior location? Is that a fair comment?
It's subjective. It is a good building in a good location.
Okay. And that's in the southwest, where our property's in the northwest?
Correct.
And can we agree that typically the delta between let's call it the asking rents as submitted by the brokers, there's typically about a 25 or 30% differential between the asking rents in the southwest and the northwest. Is that correct?
Depending on variables, there is potentially a higher rents in that quadrant.
Yeah, okay. That's fine. Okay, so well, I think those are my questions. Thank you, Mr. Brown.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Merritt, have you any questions?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. Morning, Mr. Brown.
Morning.
This is almost like a specialty building, is it not?
I would agree with that statement.
Mhm. Because there's when this was probably built, there was a lot of equipment that went inside for big machinery, etc. So it was almost like overbuilt to accommodate these big machines.
Yeah, I mean, it was obviously a printing machines and whatnot. Yeah, this is obviously a unique building, and it was probably built with that in mind. Yes.
You had said that, Mr. Brown, that you never had a chance to inspect the property.
No, but it has been inspected by my coworkers. This has been before the There's been municipal board files that have been settled recently on this, and I know there was inspections as a part of that.
Okay. So the pictures that that are in your presentation, they're just from your office, and you never took these pictures at all.
I'm going to be honest with you. I did not prepare this evidence. You can see on the front page, it still says Myrick Froelich on it.
Okay.
So I took this over at a later date and the evidence was already produced, so I can't answer that. Thank you.
Okay. So I see that the warehouse, I'm sorry, I see that the office has got a vacancy rate of 20%. And it's almost like owner occupied, is it not? But yeah, I think you mentioned that there is, lease space that that is available.
The building as a whole is owner occupied, especially the industrial portion. I believe they just have too much office space for their current operations. I did see some advertisements online with opportunities to lease space, and they do in fact lease about 27,000 square feet out.
Yeah. Okay. I think that's all the questions I have. I thank you very kindly. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Whitbread, questions?
Mhm. Mr. Merritt and I think alike. I think the questions are similar to his. So I just want to try and get the sequence of events here, Mr. Brown. The building was built in 1990.
Correct.
Was it built for the Free Press?
I believe so, yes. There is a sale in 2001.
Yes, that's where I was going.
Yeah. But I'm not, I assume that they were renting it before and then they bought it, but I'm not 100%.
I see. So it would have been built to purpose for the Free Press, for all the heavy machinery, the presses and whatnot, as Mr. Merritt has mentioned.
It was either purpose built for the Free Press or it was bought and converted into a purpose built.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's got a very, how do you say, singular purpose that would be difficult for a new owner, perhaps, to work with, unless they were a printing company similar to this one.
Yeah, I'm sure it could be used for other uses. But yeah, it's most likely at its highest and best use as a printing.
Okay, I understand that. And you say approximately 30,000 is leased out, because 87,000 is a lot of office space, isn't it? It's a
That's
very
correct.
large office space
For this type of property, that's correct.
Yeah. And so that could be where the 20% vacancy rate is coming from, is turnover amongst those leaseholds.
Yeah, it looks like I know Office has a higher vacancy rate to begin with in their model, but it's possible that we've addressed the vacancy with a higher vacancy rate.
Yeah, and there doesn't seem to be, okay. I think I'm good for now. No further questions, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I have a couple of general questions and hopefully a couple more specific ones. With respect to the general rates, you referenced $6.58. That's the blended rate or the overall rate, average rate for the manufacturing or the heavy industrial area? Is that where I get
That's
that
correct.
from?
And
Okay.
upon further research, we do have it set to below average for both components. So that would lower the rental rate and increase the cap rate.
Okay, so the rental rate for the manufacturing at $6.58 was overridden from the model rate? Is that what says?
It wasn't overridden per se, but we have income quality.
Okay.
And that's been set to below average. So average would, but yeah, it would affect the rent, have a lower rent and a higher cap rate with that adjustment.
Okay, so the cap rate at 6.2% is adjusted higher as a result of the inputs that have been made.
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct.
Now, with respect to the office, the blended rate there is $6.36 per square foot.
$6.37. I believe there was some rounding.
Okay. I'll trust your math on that for the extra cent. The office rate then is less than the industrial rate.
That's correct.
That's correct. Okay. Was the same consideration given with respect to the the rents in that inputs were made to provide for a lower rent than leading to a higher cap rate? Or are you aware of that?
I'm not aware of that.
Okay, I was just wondering if the same calculations were done with respect to the office as were done with respect to the manufacturing that you just.
Oh, in
described.
terms of the income quality or the quality?
Yes.
Yeah, no, they're both set to below average. Sorry, I didn't understand.
Oh, okay. Thank you. I'll try to get a little clearer then. Sorry about that. The land to plan ratio now at, I believe you said 2.34. Does that include the overflow parking across the street?
It does not.
It does not. Okay. Then the picture that you have started, the overhead pictures starting at page 3, those just reflect the building parcel as is presented in this number 2 on the dock, 1355 Mountain.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. I don't have anything further.
Thank you.
Mr. Story, your evidence, please.
Thank you, sir. Okay, so we've established we're at 1355 Mountain. This is indeed the Free Press building. It was constructed in 1990. I've mentioned we have some concerns with the parcel shape and that very low land to building of only 2.34 to 1. As I've mentioned, a majority of the properties that we're going to see in the Inkster Industrial Park will typically have a land to building of 4 to 1, and if there's been expansion, likely somewhere between 3 and 4 to 1. So just to give you a general overview, we are on the north side of the mountain between Bantall and Fife. We are indeed, of course, in the industrial park, the Inkster Industrial Park. We have an enormous building here, and that's a big part of our contention with the way the model outputs the value. It's very difficult to find properties that are this size. We're almost at 285,000 feet here. Sorry, 290,000 feet. But it is indeed, it was constructed for the purpose of housing the publishing and printing facility, as well as all the administrative and, of course, journalism that goes on in that building in order to produce and distribute the Free Press. Now, we agree with the assessor's comment that we have to look at this on a pretty simple basis and how the market might treat this going forward for some other user. And I believe Mr. Whitbread had mentioned or had alluded to the fact that any other user would require substantial capital work for adaptive reuse for some other user based on its current iteration. And we have a number of photos. I visited a number of times, and there have been substantial inspections. As Mr. Brown rightly pointed out, we had a number of municipal board settlements that we've worked through in the past few years. So both sides have indeed visited the property, to be certain. Okay, so once again, we have the warehouse area, which has the roll storage, the press hall, the mail room, the shipping docks, and maintenance. There is a dedicated parking lot south of the main holding. Again, that is assessed separately under the roll number 14041568000 that we looked at earlier. And it is indeed required for the operations of the business, and it does indeed form a single economic unit with the main holding. So we will request that assessed value, as it has now been confirmed, be removed from the main holding so as to avoid double counting it effectively. I'll refer to the building in the 2 distinct types of space. So we have the office space, which is indeed primarily owner occupied, but there is some space. It's typically leased to nonprofits, community groups, that type of thing. And Mr. Brown is quite right. There's simply too much office or more office than what is needed. And that is just the nature of, I suppose, the changing world of the media landscape. There's less requirement for folks in the office, and so they have space to rent. But primarily, it is indeed an owner-occupied property, and the manufacturing warehouse is single tenant. The property is zoned M2. Now, ultimately, the rents, we have to be considerate of the size of this property. Now, I apologize. The rents that I've used here are, well, I'm going to adjust Inkster. Mr. Brown and I spoke, and that's an erroneous entry on my part. That rent at $17.50 Inkster should be $5.50. and it's $134,664. I've also included the rent for Sony Place, but as I've mentioned, that $6.33 is too high if it were to be transposed to Inkster, so we do have to make some substantial adjustments in order to come to a rent that is representative of the vast size of the property. So we have not broken it down into a number of smaller premises. We believe that that distorts the potential assessment on a per square foot basis. We've simply looked at it as a single tenant, 184,000 square foot unit. So for the purpose of our report, we've applied $5.50. So that is the figure. And again, I'm leaning on an adjustment to the Sony Place rent and consideration to 1750 Inkster. Now, 1750 Inkster, I will note that the effective age is 1970, but there was a fair bit of renovation work in 2015. So I suppose the city would apply an effective age or some other effective year built to that building. We would simply recognize that it is a building that was originally built in 1970 with substantial reno work in 2015. And that speaks to that $5.50 rent. So I think that's a good indicator as to where we ought to be. But again, finding buildings that are once we get over 150,000 square feet, single tenant industrial, our market simply does not have that many leased premises of that size. So it presents something of a challenge, but we do have to consider economies of scale. Okay, vacancy is not in dispute, nor is shortfall. Cap rate. So I've used what I'm going to suggest is a reasonably low cap rate on this building, given all the issues that we've discussed. Sorry, on the industrial side, the cap rate on the industrial side is quite low. But my justification for applying a cap rate that is fairly low is that we've looked to the issue of the land to plan. That's a major concern. But we want to be very careful that we're not over adjusting based on the fact that we are indeed asking that the ancillary parcel be deducted. So if we are to deduct that parcel, then that does cure some of the issues that we have around land to building, particularly around parking. So I think it's fair to apply a 6.5 cap, given the fact that we do have concerns about land to plan, availability of parking, and some of those other issues that we discussed. So we will apply 6.5%. I've provided the board with a standalone capitalization rate study for industrial properties. So for every cycle, Altus Group will go by asset class and do research throughout the time between between hearing season and determine where the market is at for in terms of transactions and capitalization rates. Now, unfortunately, we're not going to find anything quite like this property. This will be an outlier. So we have summarized our cap rate study for you on my page 23. And we're suggesting that the cap rates ought to fall somewhere between 5.5 and 7.5. Of course, that and with a caution that if we're looking at 5.5, that's going to be for much smaller, newer, typically industrial condos. Those types of they're effectively outliers in our market, but we do have to include them with a caveat that that's why we have such a low Class A cap rate for industrial this cycle. And then non-investment grade would typically start at 7.5 and then move up with the presence of any of the factors that we would consider to be detrimental or that would indeed elevate the risk profile. So I've mentioned that in terms of any sort of adaptive reuse on a fee simple basis, any other user would likely have to spend a great deal of money to refit this property to their specific purpose. So we have to be cognizant of that, but ultimately I'm comfortable with the 6.5 cap on the industrial side, even though it does seem a bit low on its face. Once we cure that land to plan and the parking issue, it then makes sense, and the overall value then of course is supported. In terms of the office section, once again, we don't have a big point of contention here. It's simply an adjustment to the cap rate. we're using 7.5%. I've provided you with our, again, our cap rate study for office properties, supporting and summarizing our findings. And we do suggest that suburban B would consider this suburban B based on its location. It's not on a main road. It's very unique. So our baseline would be 6.75, would run up to 9.5, and we applied 7.5%. I think that's well supported by our study. So ultimately, oh, and then I suppose the last issue that I wanted to get to was that the parking that's come up a number of times. So this is on page 27. Of course, we've mentioned many times now that the property suffers from a low land to building, and then it does require the parking right across mountain. It is assessed at $990,000. It is taxed on that basis, and it has now been confirmed. So our justification, obviously, this is required based on the nature of the business. We have all this office space, and we have all the industrial space. So we look to the mandatory minimums as set forth in bylaw 200/2006, and it does indeed indicate that industrial uses require a minimum of 1 parking space for each 1,000 square feet of gross floor area. And then office space requires 750 square feet of floor area, one space for every 750 square feet. So we calculate that out to the minimum requirement. If this property was built today, it would require 327 parking stalls. I haven't had the opportunity to count each one on the main holding, but it is not 327. So we are respectfully submitting that assessment be deducted from the main holding, as it's already been captured in the rents and the cap rate. And then just further to that, on page 28, you can see that the properties were purchased together. Now, obviously, that sale is going to be between related parties. The Free Press was the tenant at that time. So I'm not putting weight on the sale, but I am indicating to you that the sales were registered at the same on the same day, and they were the sale price was inclusive of both parcels. You can see that on my page 28. So ultimately, we do believe that the main holding and the ancillary parking form a single economic unit, further supported by the bylaw requirement and the past sale. So on page 29, I have my workup. And based on our presentation today, the income value is $18,072,260. Then we, of course, adjust for that parking lot at $990,000. So that brings us to a total value of $17,082,260. We then round that to $17,082,000. The balance of my brief shows the property details. It shows the city's workup, which you have in Mr. Brown's brief, as well as the income and expense questionnaires. Starting on page 41, there's a whole raft of photos, and this is, I think many of them are probably taken on the same inspection that Mr. Brown has some photos that I think were from the same time. So I don't think we have a question about condition. I think we both agree that this is the quality of the interior. So I'll leave those photos with you. There are great many. But ultimately, we are suggesting, Mr. Chair, that the model would reasonably have a tough time, I would say, capturing some of the unique features of this property. And so we feel very comfortable submitting to you that the value not exceed $17,082,000 based on our submission. And with that, I'm very happy to take your questions, and I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Story. Mr. Brown, questions?
Yes, please. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So regarding the parking, you've calculated a parking requirement of 327?
Yes,
correct?
indeed. Yeah.
Okay. And on page 34 of your evidence, we have the income and expense statement as provided by the owner.
Yep.
And they're indicating that they have 298 parking spaces currently.
Yeah, that's they're showing. Well, they show 298. Yeah, that's right.
So they're pretty close to the requirements, about 29 parking spaces, less?
Actually, sorry, Mr. Brown, just to be very clear, 18 of those stalls are for free press vehicles that are parked indoors. They're parked inside of the building.
Yeah.
So the outdoor parking that is reported by the owner is 280, to be fair.
Well, I went through the bylaw that you cited, and there actually is a provision for indoor parking spaces, and those are counted. Yeah. So they're pretty close to the requirements as is. Do you know how many parking spots are in the auxiliary parking space?
No, I'm not sure, and just to be very clear though, they're close to the requirement, but the requirement is the mandatory legal minimum. So that's not to say anything to desirability or marketability or ability to attract or retain tenants or to function as a single tenant building. So I appreciate what you're saying, but I want to be very clear that they may be very close, but they're not close to an optimal figure. They're below the mandatory minimum.
Okay. This property has been settled at the municipal board. Do you know if the auxiliary parking lot was removed as part of those settlements?
Well, I don't know how much we want to talk about multi-year settlements. I'd actually prefer not to, as those settlements are done without prejudice. So I know that in the past, I don't know that we've looked at it, but I'm certainly suggesting that it ought to have been, and if it had been missed in the past, then that's certainly unfortunate. But I don't think we should discuss without prejudice settlements for multiple years in great detail in public, frankly.
Okay, thank you. So with your revision to your rent comparisons on page 12,
yep,
you would agree that the average is now $9 or $6 per square foot?
Well, yeah. So I mean, I think that just to be very careful with that. Sony Place, again, I don't disagree with you. That's a large space. That's a real rent. However, we should not apply it blindly and without adjustment. And Inkster is at 550. So I would put all of my consideration on those two rents. So, and again, the 550 on Inkster has a relatively recent refresh. So based on that rent being 550 and it being smaller, so it's still 50,000 feet smaller than our subject. And Sony Place is a superior location, it's a superior building. Then I think the $5.50 is quite well supported with those two inputs.
Those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Mr. Whitbread, questions?
None.
Mr. Merritt, questions?
Yes, Mr. Story, I think I'm just looking at your presentation and the city's presentation, and where everything is out of whack or different views in regards to value is the warehouse. I see that, the gross is a lot higher with the city, and the difference in value is like close to $4 million. So
yeah, so there's 990,000 in the parking, so we have that issue, and I agree with you. We have to be very careful with adjustments because the property is so large. We have to be very careful. The big points of contention would be the rent on the warehouse, and as I've mentioned, Mr. Merritt, the model valuation that's coming in is somewhat hypothetically or arbitrarily breaking these premises down into smaller sizes, which then leads to a higher rent per foot, which then of course blends out to a higher rent per foot, then has we simply used the entirety of the 184,000 feet. So there's that issue. We have an issue with the capitalization rate. We don't believe that the model is capturing some of these site-specific issues. And then, of course, we do have that slight adjustment to the suburban office cap rate. The city's at 7.4. We are using 7.5. But those would be the main points where we believe the model has failed to capture the unique issues related to this property.
and the office values are fairly close.
The office
So,
values are very close.
Yeah, so it's just the warehouse, so, okay, I thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I've just got a couple of questions. First of all, with respect to the parking, the parking that you're asking or that is ancillary across the street or referred to as ancillary is 83,000 square feet,
Sounds
roughly.
right, yeah.
Okay, a little more than that, but roughly. And you don't know how many spots are currently.
I wasn't able to go and I was actually going to go and count them so I could tell you today, but I simply ran out of time.
So there's going to be hundreds of them now in 80,000 square feet or 83,000 square feet. There'd be hundreds, but I'm not sure. Okay.
Yeah.
Fair enough. The bylaw to which you've referred for the mandatory minimums of the parking, just trying to look for it at page 27.
Yeah.
That's bylaw 2206. So that bylaw was enacted 5 years after the purchase of this building.
Yes, and after it was, certainly long after it was constructed, but if you were to construct new, that is the minimum expectation.
Right, on new construction, was there any grandfathering with respect to this bylaw? Or is there, in your opinion, a requirement that the Free Press building has to bring itself within code?
No, they would be grandfathered, although there is a question as to whether that grandfather would run with the owner or the building. But we're not suggesting that legally they're bound. We're suggesting that by the planning documents and the requirements, the minimum is not being met. So when we look to the market and what would be expected as optimal or even ideal, we don't satisfy that requirement, and that's simply supported by the current zoning requirement.
Thank you. One of the items that you mentioned, I think when you were asking Mr. Brown questions, was whether there had been an amalgamation of the roles or whether there'd been an amalgamation of the roles since the purchase took place at the same time. Has there been any application of which you're aware from the owner to amalgamate the titles? So this is one.
No, I'm not aware of it, and that's a great question because it's not required that the titles be amalgamated. So what we'll see sometimes with the city is when you have adjacent parcels where they're literally where they're next to each other.
Contiguous.
They're contiguous, thank you. The city will simply merge those roles for assessment purposes for the tax roll. So it's not contingent on the titles being merged. It's a decision that's sometimes made, and it can be done automatically. I've had clients where it's been done by the city without a request or without express consent or whatever. So the city can do that. I would suspect that the fact that this property is bifurcated from its parking by mountain is likely why they haven't been merged. But if it were directly contiguous, if it were next door, that might be a different story. That's my sense.
Okay, thank you. I don't have anything further. Mr. Brown, any summary? Sorry, you're muted, sir.
No, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Story, summary?
Yeah, just very quickly. I think that this property does require a review on a site-specific basis. I think that the model likely would have trouble dealing with it because it is such an outlier. So we feel very comfortable with the evidence and the value that we've proposed to you today, and a thank you.
Thank you. Having heard the evidence, we will conclude that matter and move on to number 3 on the list. That is, just looking here, SFI properties, or roll number 243130. Mr. Brown, if you can lead us through the evidence on that, please. And again, you're muted.
Sorry, thank you. This is file 24-3130. Roll number 14098695400. We have a 2025 assessed value of $692,800. This is vacant industrial land. It's zoned M1 and has an area of 86,603 square feet. Page 2 shows the map view. So once again, this is located on Brookside. In the Inkster Industrial Park. So this is actually an adjacent property to the file we're going to see next. It's located to the east of the next property. We can see some aerial photographs on page 3. This property is currently being used as storage, once again for the adjacent property. On page 6, we have the sale history of the property. I'll note that this sold on January 11th, 2021 for $1. And that's going to be important when we look at the next property because I believe it was a multi-roll sale, same owners and same buyers. So page 7, we have the zoning. This is zoned M1, which is manufacturing light. On page 8, I have some land sale comparables. So on the left column, we can see the subject property. And to the right of that, there are 4 comparables. These comparables range, the sale per square foot ranges from $8.94 up to $9.13. We're using a rate of $8 per square foot for the assessment. I have some pictures of the comparable sales on pages 9, 10, 11, 12, and 13. These sales are all vacant industrial land. They range from 61,925 square feet up to 90,564 square feet. They're all zoned manufacturing. 2 of them are M2, 1 of them is M1, and 1 of them is M3. And then we can see the sales are ranging from 2018 up to 2021. Based on that evidence, we ask that the assessment of $692,800 be confirmed, and I'm open for questioning. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Story, questions?
Yeah, just very quickly. Sorry, Mr. Brown, you mentioned the multi-role sale, but the sale that might come up here is going to be related to 5 buildings and a fair bit of industrial equipment. Is that the sale that you're talking about?
I'm talking about the 2021 sale.
Yeah. That's assemblage, correct?
There is a post-reference sale, but yeah, there is the sale at in 2021 is the one I'm referring to. It had a consideration of $1.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, and currently, this property is it fair to say that it would be considered rearage to the property with the improvement on it directly to the west?
That's correct.
Okay. And would you agree that the current highest and best use for that property, based on the fact that it is rearage to an active commercial property, the highest and best use would be storage and parking of trailers on that lot? Is that fair?
I would agree that that's the current use. I do believe that it could be sold and an improvement could be added to the property.
Right, but for the purpose of our well, we have the ability to look at these every 2 years. So if this use were to change in the next 2 years, is it fair to say we would likely know about it at this stage?
Well, we're trying to find what the current market value is, and the current market value could be as a prospective purchaser looking to add an improvement to the property.
Right. Okay. Okay, I'll leave that there. And this property is not serviced by city water or sewer, is that correct? No city services connected to this parcel?
That I am not aware of.
Okay. Would that affect the value in your mind?
It would.
Yeah. And then also it's not quite landlocked, but can we agree that the only access to this property is through a class, call it a class B road. It's not a typical road. There's sort of a path to it to the south. Is that correct?
It appears to be a gravel road, yes.
Yeah, and then no access from Meridian to the east, correct?
Meridian being the street behind it?
Yeah.
It doesn't appear so, no.
Okay. Those are my questions, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Merritt, questions?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Brown, you had stated that you're unaware that there's no sewer or water
I
there?
can check that right now.
Yeah, if you don't mind.
So the neighboring properties do have water, but it appears that the subject does not. But there is servicing off Meridian, so it could be added,
At a cost.
of course.
All right. I thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Whitbread, questions?
No, I'm fine, thank you.
And I don't have any questions. Thank you. Mr. Story, your evidence, please.
Thank you, sir. Okay, so we have this vacant parcel. Once again, we're in North Inkster. This property is being used as a storage lot for trailers for the property that another property that we'll see today. So again, we confirm from the city's records and Mr. Brown has now confirmed this, and it's on my page 8. You can see that the city record indicates that it's 2 acres with no sewer, no water, listed as an influence, presumably a negative influence affecting value. In my photos, you can see that there is no access from Meridian, simply an access from a dirt road only, a gravel road. And it is zoned M1. So we've provided some sales. So I'm cautious because many of these sales would be considered for further development, whereas we have to consider the highest and best use of this property serving the main holding. So in my initial submission, I've suggested $5 a foot. I'm going to adjust that on further review to $6 a foot. Which comes to $520,000. So I'm going to adjust that. I think $5 a foot is too aggressive, but $6 a foot makes more sense to me, given some of the unique issues with this property. So our request today, Mr. Chair, is going to be adjusted to $520,000. I've included the sales for you. It is a unique property, and we have to take into account that it is serving another higher and better function of the adjacent lot. So that is our request today. We do respectfully submit that $520,000 is appropriate, and I thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Brown, questions?
Yes, please. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just quickly, your calculation at $6 a square foot, that would be 522,720.
I used your 86,603 by 6, but sorry, you're saying 522?
Oh, sorry, I was using your 87,120.
Oh, yeah, no, I used the 2 acres, but obviously that rounds up a touch, but using the precise 86,603 at $6 gets us to that figure.
Okay, thank you. And this does have common ownership with the property to the west of it?
Yes, indeed.
Okay, thank you. Those are my questions.
Thank you. Mr. Whitbread, questions?
Just one. So if this property were to be sold to a new to a new owner, do you agree, Mr. Story, that they could add access from Meridian and water and sewer at a cost?
At a cost, water and sewer at a cost, to be certain. Creating a curb cut or access and egress from Meridian would be contingent on approvals. So that would not simply be something that they could buy, let's say, whereas water and sewer would come at a cost, but the access and egress would require an application and would take time, and it would be contingent on approvals from city management, I would suppose.
Are you aware of any restrictions currently against the curb cut?
No, I'm not, but I know that it's I've certainly seen a number of owners apply for curb cuts or things that seem like they would be not an issue, but they do sometimes. They are occasionally not accepted. So yeah, that's sort of my answer to that. It's not the water and sewer. I agree. You could likely pay to be hooked in to municipal services, but I think applying for a curb cut, the odds of that being approved are certainly not 100%, from my experience.
Okay, yeah, we understand there are challenges. Thank you. No further questions.
Thank you. Mr. Merritt, any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Whose square footage are we using?
86,603.
Mr. Brown, why is there a difference? Do you know? Okay.
I don't know.
That was my error, sir. I simply used 2 acres by 47,000.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's slightly, it rounds up to approximately 2 acres, but it is slightly lower, but it's a nominal difference.
Okay. And the figure that you've concluded value, is it 220 or 223? Pardon me, 523?
Sorry, 520 is what I've suggested.
520?
Yes, indeed.
Okay. I thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Merritt. Just have one moment, please. None of your comparable sales are in the Inkster Park area. Is that correct? Looking at the addresses here.
No, they're not. No, but we did try to find ones that have site influences with lack of city services. So, so there's a limited pool that we can draw from. So we did identify those that have similar issues regarding unserviced land.
Okay, thank you. I don't have anything further. Mr. Brown, any summary required?
Just quickly, I'll note in our page 8, we do have the subject property as no sewer, no water. So conceivably that's already been factored into the assessment. We are at $8. I'll note that all the comparables do have sewer and water, but they are higher. So it looks like we've taken that into account. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Story, summary?
Yes, just very quickly. We are firmly of the belief that the current highest and best use of this property is to serve the main holding. So we have to consider all of these factors. It is not a site that would be developed without impeding the performance of the adjacent property. So we feel comfortable at $6 after our secondary review and adjustment. And I thank you.
Thank you. Having heard all the evidence, we will conclude that matter. And before we move on to number 4, does anyone need a break? 5 minutes?
Please.
Good idea.
Okay, then if we can come back, my clock just clicked over to 10:09. If we can come back to 10:15, please.
All right. Okay,
Thank you.
good. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to call the meeting back to order, please. And if we can turn to number 4 on the docket, that'd be the next matter. Street address of 1995 Brookside Boulevard. Mr. Brown, if you can introduce the property and lead us through your evidence, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is file 24-2907, roll number 14098695300. We have a civic address at 1995 Brookside Boulevard. This is between Inkster and Jefferson. 2025 assessed value of $1,188,000 today. This is an industrial warehouse property built between 1975 and 1979. We have wall heights ranging from 13 to 18 feet. A land area of 107,711 square feet. A leasable area of 9,150 square feet. And a land to plan ratio of 11.77. Turning to page 2. We have that sale on January 1st, 2021. If we remember the previous property, they had the sale on January 11th, 2021 for $1. So this was a multi-roll sale. We're considering it. So the main holding, the one we're hearing right now, sold for $2,530,000. And then 6 days later, the adjacent parcel sold for $1. So we're treating this as a multi-roll sale with a combined value of $2,530,000. Today, if we combine the assessments of the two properties, it would be $1,880,000. So we're below the sale price in 2021. I'll note there's a sale in 2023, but that involves another parcel to the south, and it is post-reference, so we'll strike that from the record. It should not have been included in the evidence. Page 3, once again, shows the location of the subject property. It's to the west of the previous property. This property is the main holding and does contain the building and the outhouses. On page 6, we have my income workup for the subject. So we have the leasable area at 9,150 square feet. I did not calculate the average for this. So the average would be $6.83 per square foot. We've reduced that by a vacancy of 3.5%, expenses at 3%, and a shortfall of $4 per square foot, yielding the net operating income of $57,254. And we've capitalized that at 4.9%. This gives us a capitalized value of $1,168,000 rounded, plus $20,000 for the additional building value. And those would be for those Quonset huts, which you can see on page 5. Those are unheated properties, which do add a small portion. We're using $20,000 today. So that gives us our total estimated value of $1,188,000. Page 7, I have some rent comparables. These comparables range from 2,540 square feet up to 9,638 square feet. We have wall heights ranging from 13 to 22. Effective year builds ranging from 1960 up to 1992. And the net rents are ranging from $7 a square foot up to $9.75 a square foot. Capitalization rates, once again on page 8. City showing a range between 5.35 and 7.3. Obviously, this falls below that, and that would be due to the size and the location. Based on that evidence, we're asking that the assessment be confirmed at $1,188,000 today. Thank you, and I'm open for questioning.
Thank you. Mr. Story, questions?
Yes. Mr. Brown, how did that, sorry, I'm a little confused about the cap rate. 4.9%. How is that developed? Sorry, is it, you said it's based on size?
Well, it's developed based on comparable sales and rents, market rents. But yeah, the model will generally use a lower cap rate for smaller properties.
Okay, and when I look at the when I look at your page 8, you're suggesting that the best in class, the 20th percentile ought to be 5.35%, correct?
At the 20th percentile, correct.
Yeah, and the brokers are suggesting for industrial Bs a starting point of 6 or 6.5, correct?
Those are generally much bigger properties, generally investment grade, which the subject is not. Generally, these smaller properties are open to a larger pool of investors. Obviously, the larger investment grade properties are generally bought by REITs or larger corporations, whereas these smaller ones are more active in the market amongst individual purchasers, and that generally will drive the price up and the cap rate down a bit.
Okay, and is there any evidence of a 4.9 cap that you're aware of that you could share with us? I'm concerned that it's so far out of the range for the city and the brokers, but do you have anything to support that in terms of a sale or to support the hypothesis that the smaller properties ought to be applied effectively a lower risk profile?
The only sale I have is the sale of the subject property at $2.5 million in 2021.
Right, and that's a multi-role sale, as you mentioned, and it's also, can we agree, it's an assemblage? This owner owns a number of properties on Brookside, is that fair?
Technically, it was not a multi-role sale. They did register them separately. Once again, this property was registered at 2.5 million. The previous property was registered at $1.
Okay.
And we are treating it as a multi-role sale because it was 6 days apart, same owners, same vendor, same purchaser.
Right, and are you considering the fact that it's an assemblage as well?
Would that drive the price up or down?
Up.
Up. Okay,
Yeah,
but if
so
you
you'd be motivated to put parcels together, that would be the theory, correct?
but if you combine the assessments, we'd be below that sale price.
Right, but we're suggesting the sale price is motivated and therefore too high, but that's okay. I think I'll get to that in my presentation. Those are my questions, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Whitbread, any questions?
No, that was my question.
Mr. Merritt?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Brown, the city's at 1,188,000, yet there's a sale in 2021 of 2.5. So why isn't this reflected in the assessed value?
That's what the model generated. It wasn't reviewed. Based on the attributes that we have in our system, that's just the value that the model produced. But I'll note that if we use that sale price and well, there is no income because it's owner occupied, but if we use the model value, it would produce an even lower cap rate.
Mm-hmm. You had talked about on this property, there's Quonset buildings. I guess there's maybe 2 buildings on there.
That appears to be correct.
Yeah, but the lease area is 9,150 square feet. Is that correct?
Yeah.
But yet you come along and you're saying when your value comes in, the outbuildings are $20,000. What? Am I missing something here?
So the square footage of 9,000 and change would be the main building. So on page 5, the building located in the middle of the photograph. Okay. And then there is a covered garage at the top left of the property. That would be those two. And then the $20,000 would be the Quonsets.
Okay. This area is quite big. It's 2.5 acres, is it not? Yeah, approximately.
Yeah, I'll take your word for that.
Yeah. Okay. But there's no sewer and no water on here.
That's correct.
Okay. So I'm just thinking the cap rate of 4.9 seems to be quite low for, buildings in this category and location. Comments?
I would agree it looks low from the outset, but the model is based on sales in the area. And it does take into account the size. And we do see that the smaller buildings generally do well just because they're open to a larger pool of investors.
Okay, I thank you, Mr. Brown. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Brown, you indicated that the model takes into account sales in the area. Would the previous sale of the 2.25, previous sale to which we referred, would that be reflected in the model calculation?
That was used in the model. That's correct.
So an inflated price could lead to a lower cap rate. Is that correct mathematically?
Well, when we entered this sale into our system, we did merge the two properties together. So it's picking up both properties in that sale.
Right. But if that was an inflated sale price for whatever reason, that could lead to a lower cap rate.
Yeah, I mean, it's subjective to speculate whether or not that
Right.
sale price is inflated or not.
Yeah, if there's evidence of that.
We did
certainly,
review the sale and we deemed it to be a bona fide sale that we did include in the analysis.
Okay, thank you. I don't have anything further. Mr. Story, your evidence, please.
Thank you, sir. Okay, so ultimately, we're just talking about the cap rate today. So I do want to point out, we've mentioned this, the sale. Now, there's a sale that's not only post-reference, but also erroneous. That's a sale of 8 buildings plus equipment, and it's post-reference. So I want to be very clear about that. That's the most recent sale, and the assessor has quite rightly pointed out that it ought not to be considered. But the sale that is being considered, and Mr. Mann, you've asked Mr. Brown whether that sale had been included in the model. He said that it has, but we also know that that sale included 4 rolls. So that was 1987, 1991, 1995, and the vacant parcels. So we would generally approach assemblage or multi-roll sales with some caution. I believe that the IAAO standard indicates that you ought to approach those sales with caution. So if Mr. Brown has reviewed it and the department deems it to be bona fide, that's fine. But we believe that those are motivated sales and should be considered, if they are considered, with a great deal of caution. So for the purpose of our exercise today, we don't disagree with the potential market rent. We don't disagree with the NOI. In fact, I noticed in the income and expense mailers, the NOI that was recorded is actually pretty close to what we're suggesting and what the assessor is suggesting as well. So we are suggesting a cap rate of no less than 7%. And that is, of course, based on the fact that industrial B, by the brokers, boards would suggest a minimum baseline of 6 or 6.5. But we also have to consider that the property is indeed unserviced, and it is a fairly large area that would require servicing or may require servicing at some point in the future. So we've adjusted from what I would call our baseline of 6.5 or 6.75, somewhere in that range, to 7%. I think a quarter, 25 basis point adjustment to the cap rate based on site-specific review of the property makes sense. So ultimately, our NOI is not in dispute today, Mr. Chair, but we do believe that 4.9 cap rate is far too low. We've not seen any indication from the brokers suggesting cap rates that are sub 5 in this round, certainly not for a property like this. And we haven't received anything from the city supporting a model of 4.9 cap. So from our perspective, that's far too low. So we've applied a cap rate of 7%. We've not considered those sales to be typical. They are, from our perspective, motivated. They're based on an assemblage. So we're using a cap rate that would be supported by the market data, by the brokers. And I think actually from the city's own evidence would probably suggest that the 80th percentile is more appropriate for a property like this, unpaved, older industrial with some outside Quonset huts. So we haven't disputed the adjustment of the Quonset huts. We've included that there. So our only point of contention is that cap rate of 4.9. We've applied 7%. Our income value then becomes $817,907. We adjust for the Quonset huts $20,000. I presume we've accepted that. That's the depreciated cost applied by the city. That's fine. But ultimately, we come to a value of $837,907, which we then round to $838. And again, that is simply based on an adjustment to a more appropriate market cap rate of 7%. And I will leave my presentation there, Mr. Chair. Open to your questions, and I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Story. Mr. Brown, questions?
Yes, please. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Story, you've indicated that the 2021 sale included 4 parcels of land?
No, I'm suggesting that this owner is assembling the 4 parcels in the immediate vicinity. So they own, I think it's 1987, 1991, 1995, and the one with no civic address that we looked at earlier. So they own all 4 of those.
Would that not be the new owner at the 2023 sale?
Yes, yeah, that's correct. But I believe that they were assembling this in 21. I didn't dig into the sale because I don't think it's particularly relevant, but it's from our perspective, these sales are atypical as the owner looks to be assembling.
So it looks like in my analysis, it looks like, and this, I'm sorry, this isn't a question, but it appears that the 2023 sale was an assemblage and the 21 sale was just the 2 parcels. And those are my questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Merritt, questions?
I have none, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Mr. Whitbread?
I have none, thank you.
I do with respect to the land plan. This is, given what we've heard today about the optimal land plan, 11.77 is unusually large.
Yes, it is.
More than double the usual space or even triple.
Well, yes, that's correct. However, we have to consider that it is, this part of Brookside is predominantly a trucking route. Mm-hmm. So we will typically see greater land to plan in those properties. So I agree with what you're saying. We would typically expect to see 4% optimally in the Inkster Industrial Park. This is a little ways down the road for an unpaved trucking facility. So we would expect it to be higher, but you're quite correct. 11 to 1 is very high.
Thank you. I don't have anything further. Mr. Brown, any summary?
No, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. And Mr. Story?
Yeah, just very quickly, the cap rate of 4.9 from our perspective is not supported. It's not supported by our research or by the documents submitted by the city with respect to the broker's conclusions. So that cap rate is far too low from our perspective, and that is the main issue under contention. So I will leave that with you, and I thank you.
Thank you. We will conclude that matter and move on to number 5 on the list, please. That being the roll number 242119. I don't have a street address on that, but if you could turn to number 5, please, Mr. Brown, and give us your evidence.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this is file 24-21919. Roll number 0309166170. We have a 2025 assessed value of $599,000. I do believe the appellant is seeking confirmation for this property. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
Okay.
I noticed that as well. I think this has the same proviso in your brief with respect to the being deducted from the next property, and I just want to clear to all parties that the confirmation is not going to be dependent on decision with respect to the other property.
Yes,
so that's okay. Yeah. Okay. Well, given that confirmation, the amount of the valuation or the valuation of the property was $599,000. Is that correct, Mr. Brown?
That's correct.
Good. Any questions?
No questions, sir. I'll leave my comments for the presentation. Okay. Yeah.
Mr. Merritt, any questions?
I have none, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
I have none.
Okay, then what we'll do is we'll conclude that matter and move on to 1470 Chevrier. That's the last matter on the list. Mr. Brown, would you please give us your evidence on that?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is file 24-2118. Roll number 0306605350. We have a civic address at 1470 Chevrier Boulevard. This is just east of Waverly between Newmarket and Hamlin Street. We're defending a 2025 assessed value of $4,623,000 today. This is an industrial property built between 1989 and 2002, with wall heights ranging from 10 to 20 feet. We have a land area of 334,363 square feet and a gross floor area of 37,938 square feet. This has a land to plan ratio of 8.98. On page 3 of my evidence, we can see the location of the subject property on Chevrier Boulevard. We have some aerial photographs continuing on page 4 and 5 and 6, and then we have some street view photographs on page 7 and 8. Page 9, once again, this is a split income stream. The first income stream is the office, which is being classified as OFS. We have 5,174 square feet at $16.44, yielding a potential rent of $85,061. We've reduced that by 6% vacancy, 3% expenses, and $8 per square foot of shortfall. We've capitalized this portion at 5.45%, yielding a value of $1,378,000. On page 10, we have some rent comparables for that office portion. We can see these are ranging from $17.46 up to $22 per square foot. Areas ranging from 2,400 square feet up to 9,580 square feet. All classified as OFS, with years built ranging from 1971 to 2006. The following page, on page 11, shows the storage warehouse portion of the subject property. We have a total leasable area of 32,764 square feet. This gives us a potential rent of $223,527. We've reduced that by 4.5% vacancy, 3% expenses, and $4 per square foot in shortfall. We've capitalized that NOI at 6.2%, which generates the value of $3,245,000. I have some storage warehouse comparables on page 12, ranging from 2,400 square feet up to 16,915 square feet, while heights ranging from 14 to 26, years built ranging from 1964 up to 1998, and we can see the net rents ranging from $7.31 up to $16 a square foot. Page 13 just shows the amalgamation of those two income streams into a summary with the estimated market value of $4,623,000. Once again, we have the capitalization rates located on page 14, showing a range from our 20th percentile of 5.35% up to our 80th percentile of 7.3%, and the accompanying outside sources that justify that range. This does have an income and expense statement on page 16. If we turn to page 18, this shows the tenant verification form. I'll note that if we use that monthly rent, they're showing their leased area at 30,000 square feet. That would generate a price per square foot of $8.72 a square foot, which is below what we're using in our model. Based on that, we're asking that the assessment be confirmed at $4,623,000 or $4,623,000, and I'm open to questioning. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Story, questions?
Yes, indeed. Okay. Mr. Brown, does the city perform percentage increase reviews cycle over cycle? I know that had happened in the past. Do you know if that still occurs?
That does.
Okay. And so can we agree this is an increase of 40%? Was that reviewed? Does that not seem out of the acceptable range?
I can't say that offhand. I'm not sure if it was reviewed or not.
And this value today is all modeled, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And does the cap rate consider when we have the sort of built up property with 8 buildings on site, does the cap rate consider any inefficiency for from that regard, or is it simply treated as a single, as though it were a single building?
I'm unaware.
Okay, and can we agree that of the of this property as a whole, 40% of it is actually unheated storage? Are you aware of that?
I'm not unaware of that.
Okay. Okay, and now can we agree that the office building, or what you call the office income stream, that building forms a single economic unit with the it's truck storage, right?
I believe so, yeah.
Okay. Okay, so very quickly, and you said it's all modeled. That office cap rate of 5.45, that's simply modeled, correct?
Correct.
Okay, and I just want to go through these rents very quickly. That one on Scurfield, that's a gross rent, correct?
Sorry, what page?
This is your page 10, 104 Scurfield. It's a 1-year lease and it's gross. I was able to review the INE. Were you able to check those rents?
I did not check that. I'll take your word for it.
Okay. And then number 2, are you aware that that's the Business and Science Center? So that's occupied by an audiologist. You aware of that?
I'm not aware of that.
Okay, and typically, can you agree with me as a general comment that medical or medical related purposes in the office world would typically rent on the higher end of the suburban office scale? Is that fair?
If all other variables are the same, that's correct.
Okay, and then the number 5. Now I know about this one because it was our client. That lease is based on the assumption of a lease based on the sale of a business. Were you able to look into that previous sale and those arrangements? It's a bit complicated, but have you looked into that one to ensure that it's at market?
I have not.
Okay. Okay. We've talked about the 40% is unheated storage. Okay. Just moving forward here. In terms of the rental of comparables for the storage warehouse, number 1, is that not a credit office related to a large auto dealer? Is that what goes on in that premise?
Yeah, I'm familiar with that. It almost looks like a show home.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, and then on Chevrier, can we agree that would be considered not a storage warehouse, but rather flex industrial, where they have a construction company as their office in the front part of that? Sorry.
I mean, it's similar. I mean, the subject property also has some office space that's being valued separately. So,
okay. And then just lastly, the one on Lawson, that was a hockey rink, wasn't it?
I'm unaware.
Okay, it was called the rink, but okay, that's fine. I think I've have my questions about the cap rates and the sales, so I'll just ask my questions regarding cap rates sales carry forward, Mr. Chair, and then I'll leave my questions there for this one.
Certainly. Thank you. Mr. Whitbread, any questions?
Just to clear up a little bit of confusion I'm having, Mr. Brown, I'm going to the expense document on page 16, but let's go down to page 18. And we show the client as Bison Transport taking up 30,000 square feet. Is that correct? You're reading?
That's what they've indicated.
Yes. And they're charging them $21,800 a month rent.
Correct.
So the actual would be something, what would it be, about 730, maybe a little bit more a month.
Based on the square footage that they're indicating at 30,000, it would be $8.72. Now we're assessing it at a higher square footage.
872, you said?
Correct.
Thank you for that. And you're assessing it at the 32,764?
30. Well, we have the two components. Office at 5,174 and the storage at 32,764.
Yeah. But are you thinking this is just storage space for Bison Transport? store their trucks or something?
Yeah, it would appear so.
Okay. And you're charging $682 for that particular
Correct.
warehouse. Or sorry, your evidence suggests
The model driven value, correct.
Okay, thank you. I have no further questions.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Merritt. And you're muted, Mr. Merritt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Brown, I note somewhere in the brief that 40% is unheated, 15,220 square feet.
Yeah, and that would have the lower rent of $5.79.
$5.79?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. That's all the questions that I have. Thank you very kindly.
Thank you.
My questions relate to the modeled rent on your page 11, and you've explained the $5.79. It's not a large area, the leasable area of 1,800 square feet for standard finish at $12.86. What is it about that space that makes it worth double, or more than double some of the other averages?
I'm guessing that's an office component to one of the buildings. And then we have the office component in the other building because there's multiple buildings on this property.
Okay, you haven't inspected this building, or have you?
That I have not inspected this building.
Okay, thank you. I don't have anything further. Mr. Story, your evidence, please.
Yes, sir. Okay, 1470 Chevrier. This building was built in 1989 and 2002. Now we've mentioned, or Mr. Brown has mentioned the income and expense and indicating the 30,000 feet. So I want to be very clear about that. The lease comprises the use of the main holding, all of the buildings, and considers the adjacent parcel that we've just confirmed. So ultimately, this entire building this entire property is a single tenant industrial property that has a number of these different components. But I think it's erroneous to carve off the office area because it's required for the operations on site. I will also note that the rent that's being collected now, it's older, so we have adjusted upward, but it does also include insurance. The tenant, insurance is included in that rent, so it should actually be lower. We're using it as a guideline. We're not applying it wholesale, but we are adjusting it outward. So just want to be very clear about that. So on page 6 of my brief, I show you the different areas and when they were built. So once again, you can see that a great deal of this building was built in the late 1980s to the mid 1990s, with about call it just under 20,000 or so feet. About half of the property was built in the early 2000s, in 2001 and 2002. Again, 40% of this building is unheated storage space. It is a trucking facility. So ultimately, we do note that the monthly rate of $21,800 that starts in 2018 and runs through our reference date equates to $261,600 annually. That equates to approximately $688 per foot. That includes the separately assessed roll. So we're using a figure that's higher than that in our estimation. We're adjusting up to $7 a foot. Now the major difference that we're going to see today, Mr. Chair, is we're not taking the office and separating it out as a separately leasable area. Now we did do that for the free press, but that is a different property altogether. We've agreed, I think, that it was over officed. This property has the appropriate amount of office. It's just not attached to one of the storage buildings. It is standalone. But by carving it off and applying rents that are commensurate with medical services, that creates a distortion from our perspective. So we have blended those two streams together on page 23, and this is how we've always treated this property. We've never carved off the office and tried to apply some different value, because ultimately the terms of the lease consider all of the buildings once again, as well as the adjacent parcel. So we've used $7 in our workup. We've used a vacancy rate of 4.5% and an overall capitalization rate of 6.25%, which is reasonably low, but fair given the fact that we have a very good land to building. Here we have some positive attributes. It's a newer property, so 6.25 is good. And once we've included the fact, or we've deducted the adjacent roll, that cures any issues requiring extra parking or storage on site. You can see from the photos that the entirety of the property is indeed used by this by the single tenant. So with that being said, and based on our submission on page 23, we are requesting a value of $3,227,852. We round that to $3,228,000, and once again, the value of the parcel that should be merged into the main holding. That's already been confirmed, so we don't want to double count that. We've removed it from our calculation. We have inspection photos. This property has been inspected a number of times. I did not have the opportunity to. These are file photos that we have from a previous inspection, but they give you a sense of the interior. You can see that is exactly the type of office that you would expect in the trucking transport industry. It's not like a medical office or any such thing. We've also included the interior photos of the building, as well as some information regarding income and expense. So once again, we've agreed earlier that 10 to 15% office finish is typical for industrial. This calculates to 13.6%. So we do suggest that this property ought to be treated as a single unit, where the office is required to subtend the income stream in the storage warehouse. So with that being said, we feel very comfortable at the resultant value of $3,228,000. And with that, I'm happy to take your questions, and I thank you.
Thank you. Questions, Mr. Brown?
I have no questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Merritt, questions?
I have none, Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Mr. Whitbread, any questions?
I might be a little bit confused, Mr. Story, but you could perhaps explain why you would merge the two properties, the office and the warehouse, given I believe the warehouse is an unheated storage area.
Sure,
and
yes.
would typically be of less value than a finished office area. I didn't understand that.
Sure, yeah, no, that's great. So the typically we would expect to see some amount of office in these industrial buildings, particularly in trucking and logistics. You need to have folks running the business, and then you have, of course, the storage element that you've quite rightly pointed out. In this specific instance, it's simply a matter of the physical configuration, where we would expect to see that 10 to 15% office finish physically attached to the industrial building. In this case, it stands alone. From our perspective, though, the entirety of this property is predominantly industrial. It is uniquely industrial. So it doesn't really make a great deal of sense to remove the office and treat it as though it is a suburban office that stands alone, because if you were to do that, it would be to the detriment of the storage warehouse. It is one entity, it's one economic unit, and it functions in that way. So we wouldn't, frankly, be having this conversation if the office building was attached to one of the warehouses. But I think that is why the city breaks out these income streams. We would typically see this assessed as a industrial storage warehouse. So that's how we've done it. That's what's been accepted in the past, and that is certainly supported by market behavior and by the lease agreement in place between the parties. They're not renting it out as a professional services office. They're leasing it as part of the larger parcel that runs the trucking facility. So I hope that makes sense. It's based on the fact that we would expect 10 to 15% of office finish, which is what we have here, but physically it is in a standalone building. However, I don't believe that it ought to be assessed as something that it's not, quite frankly. It's not a high-end suburban professional services office. It is the office that supports the activities of the trucking and transport business. So that's
help me a little bit further then.
Sure.
Let's go to page 33 of your evidence.
Yeah.
I think I'm on, yeah, it's a full page photo. What is the office building that you're talking about? I see
Sure.
3 buildings.
Yeah, so if you follow me, please, then to page 25.
I'm looking at page 33.
Oh, okay, page 33. I see, the overhead view. Okay, so if you see where, okay, so on the far left, in the upper left corner, that would be one of the office areas.
That would be one of them, or that is the office?
That's one of them, and then there's a very small area. Mr. Mann had asked Mr. Brown about that 1289 for that smaller space, and that is at the very, very bottom. You can see where the Google map, it says Chevrolet, it's upside down from our view, but there's a tiny little, kind of like almost like a hut right there, and that is also part of the what we would consider office, and I think that is why that premise is being applied a higher rent. But those are the 2 spaces that have office finish. The rest of the property is storage for the trucking industry.
And is there any mechanical work being done in this building beside the tiny storage or tiny office building you indicated? The bottom building, is any of that mechanic work or just storage?
Sorry, for the office area at the.
You see the little building that you just referred to?
Yeah.
That building beside it, the larger building beside it.
Oh yes, that's the storage warehouse. Yeah, that's
that is just warehouse. There's no mechanical work being done.
That is correct. And that's actually on page 32. That's the interior of that building.
Yes, definitely storage. And so then if we go to the larger building up in the top middle, that also is storage?
The one on page 30?
33.
33. Yeah, so they're storage. So it's not a mechanic. It is storage and loading and unloading for trucking. So they would be considered storage warehouses. That's correct.
I guess I'm looking at page 31 and I'm seeing tables with equipment, mechanical equipment, that sort of thing. Might suggest some mechanical work being done in there.
Sure, maybe light repair, but it's okay. Yeah, no, I appreciate what you're saying. I think that's right. Yeah.
And then this standard finish office that you show on page 29, you would equate that rent-wise to the pictures that you show on page 30, etc.
Yes, it's all leased as one unit. Yeah, it's all covered by the same lease, including the adjacent parcel. It's all under one lease.
Yeah, I hear you. So, okay, thank you for that clarification. No further questions, sir.
Thank you. I have a question with respect to the merging of or blending of the cap rates that you have.
Yeah.
The cap rate blending that you're using is 6.25%, right?
That's correct.
I look at the cap rate table, specifically your cap rate table on page 21. The difficulty I'm having, and I'll allow you to hopefully explain or clarify, this property has 8 different buildings, 4 different premises built over 13 years. Some are built specifically unheated for storage, some are built specifically for office, different functions.
Well, no, it's the office is built to support the industrial use. So
The cap rate table that you have on page 21, are any of those properties similar in that the office component is a separate standalone building?
No, I don't believe so. We don't typically see that. And again, it's a unique situation, as I've mentioned, that's brought on by the physical configuration, whereas we would look to the use. It would be unlikely that that trucking office would be leased separately, because then you'd have a great deal of difficulty supporting the operations of the trucking facility. So we treat it all as one. And that cap rate is a bit low ultimately, but again, we do have some positives. Good land to building. Trucking is in the reference state was doing quite well, but having many buildings on site is not typically efficient. We would consider that. Generally, we would make an adjustment as a value negative, but given the age of the property, it is newer. And given the sector, 6.25 is optimistic, but I think it's supported.
Can you point out to me in your cap rate study?
Yep.
And I went through and I couldn't find it, but this adjustment for multiple buildings in a sale property that would either increase or decrease.
Oh, in terms of our sales?
Yes.
This cycle, we don't have any with multiple buildings, but we do mention factors that may influence the cap rate that we might make adjustments for when the property is in subject on appeal.
Mm-hmm.
So we consider locational, external factors, the site size, in this case, that's positive. Building size, as we talked about on Free Press, anything single tenant over 100,000 would cause an elevated risk. Condition, and then I suppose under configuration and building layout. So inefficient piecemeal construction may result in functional obsolescence, translating into higher investor risk. So in this case, I haven't made an adjustment, but when we do have properties that are, and to be fair, it's generally over many decades. So if you have a property that started being built in the 1950s and then was updated in the 80s or 90s or some such thing, we would review that on a site-specific basis and determine if that warrants adjustment. But I haven't made an adjustment here. It is something that we consider, but no adjustment has been made from our baseline.
Okay, thank you. I don't have anything further. Mr. Brown, any summary?
No, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Story?
No, I think we've said it all for this one. Sir.
Thank you. In that case, that brings us to the end of the docket. We've now heard all of the items scheduled, and this hearing is adjourned. Thank you very much for your time, Mr. Story, Mr. Brown. It's appreciated. You'll be receiving the letter, registered letter, in short order.
Perfect.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Richard, Ron, you want to take 5 minutes before we come back?
Oh, sure.